Brand disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed by individuals on this platform, the callers plus invited guests, are their own. The information you hear does not reflect the overall views of all parties associated with this brand. We encourage everyone to research all things heard live or via archive for edification purposes. Discretion is advised.
Don't touch that dial. You're now listening to Debate Talk Free Radio.
Help keep the show on the air. If you want to help, you can send your donation through PayPal. The email is debatetalkforyou@gmail.com or through Cash App, $Sal Showtime. Thanks for your support.
Peace. What it is your brother Tyvon Swainell, a.k.a. the Orthodox Moor, a.k.a. the Seven Pillar Saracen. And this evening, we will be joined by the good brother Benayah Israel, talking about the history of the First African Baptist Church and the identity of the people there. And this conversation was brought about because, just as a backdrop, there's been a lot of back and forth in between the conscious community and the UA community and the Israelite community in terms of these Georgia pews and the First African Baptist Church and whatnot. And in the midst of all that, I went on the Dagger Squad to talk to Garfield about a few things concerning the pews and whatnot and the people of the church. And one of the points that I brought out was the fact that whether or not there's Hebrew on the pews or not, it does not matter in terms of the concept of Israelite identity, because there were people in the church who were shown to be identifying as Israel without the pews. And so I got challenged on that. And then when challenged, I pointed to the work that the good brother Benayah had done in showing the people of the church within their own documentation identifying as Israel and whatnot. And so I went to his channel. I took him to his channel, played a video where he had some fantastic information on it. And even the Dagger Squad had to admit that it was primary documentation. And the next day they went to try to disparage the brother by doing a bait and switch tactic. Instead of dealing with the information about the church or whatnot, they try to bait and switch the sources the brother was talking about to say he was citing something concerning immigrants coming in being Black Jews or whatnot, which is a completely different argument, which we'll get in tonight as well. However, it was a bait and switch tactic. So instead of dealing with his information directly and honestly, they were kind of underhanded about it. So I wanted to give the good brother a chance to come through and give his information unencumbered and in a complete manner and whatnot, so everyone can get a full understanding of what the brother is saying. Because from what I understand and what I've seen, he's put a lot of good work in and brought a lot of good information that we can all glean some good info from. So without further ado, we're bringing the good brother Benayah Israel to the panel. Shalom, Mike. How you doing?
Hey, shalom, family. Hopefully everything's good.
Yes, sir. Hey, real quick before we get into this, where can people find you and get a hold of you on social media, et cetera, whatnot?
Primarily either on Facebook, and that's Benayah Israel, or on YouTube. YouTube's another good place to find new videos, new lessons and whatnot. Okay.
Well, like I told you beforehand, brother man, the floor is yours. I will share screen whenever you want to, and you can just give your information to the people unencumbered, brother man.
All right, praise Most High. Well, thank you, brother, for giving me this opportunity to share. Like I was sharing with you earlier. Actually, I want to try to share my screen while we talk here. Let me know if you can see my.
Yes, sir.
Okay, is it full screen or is it? Let me see.
It's not in present mode, no.
It's not in present mode. Okay.
But I'm making this full screen as I can. There you go. It's present mode now.
Okay. Oh.
It was just on it. Where you just had it was on there.
Okay, hang on. All right.
Yeah, you're gonna have to share screen one more time because you wouldn't share yours. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna switch to. Oh wow! I didn't realize I had an audio file on here. Okay. All right, just bear with me, family.
No worries.
What I'm noticing that is on each of these slides, there's an audio file. If you heard Shalom family, it's Benayah ben Israel. So, so what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna go ahead and share. I'm not gonna switch over to present mode. I'm going to share. That way I can delete the audio file as I go through. Most High willing, this will eventually be in a video form, that will show up as a lesson on my either YouTube, Facebook, Patreon, you name it. I'm going to most high willing drop it out there. But okay, but I started sharing again, so hopefully you can see it.
Yes, sir. It's sharing right now.
Okay, praise the Most High. All right, so it's interesting because if you're familiar with any of the videos that I put out, my primary work is to follow Israel. Follow Israel from Jerusalem all the way over into the States. And what I tell people is that I was getting to the part in the journey where I was following the brews into the U.S. At the time, I wasn't even worried. I wasn't thinking about any church, no First Baptist, none of that stuff. I was just simply following the blood trail, so to speak. And sure enough, it led me into Savannah. As far as like when I followed the references in the blood trail, it led me to Savannah as far as following the Spanish and Portuguese brews into the States. And I just want to just give you just a little bit of a backstory. And actually, the information that I'm going to touch on here is in the first two videos that's out there. I believe it's the first two videos is called they be Hebrews, right? And it's 1 and 2, so you can think of this as 3. So I'm just going to do just a quick review of what was presented in the first two videos. I'm going to do it very quickly. But the first thing I touched on was just the migration pattern. How did the brews get from Spain and Portugal over into the Americas, over into the United States? And I think it's worth saying, and maybe I do take it for granted. And thank you, brother, for we was kind of chatting earlier, but I do take it for granted that people know that there are more than one type of brew. More. I say brew, I really mean Jew or Judah. The southern kingdom of Israel is what I'm referring to. Whenever you hear me say brew. But I assume that most people know that there are different types of brews that are out there, right? There are black brews that are out there, Southern Kingdom. There are white brews that are out there, Ashkenazi Jews, right? Not the same people, totally different history, right? And I think I made the mistake on one of the on some of the videos where I didn't necessarily call that out, and I think some folks got confused on that. And you'll see it here when we go through some of these references, because and that's the problem whenever I come across these references. One of the things that I have to do, and I do it, I do it mentally, like every time that I pull up a reference that talks about brews, right? It's a reference that's talking about Jews. I always separate if it's talking about Ashkenazis or if it's talking about Sephardic Jews or the Jews or brews of Spain and Portugal, or if it's talking about some other brews, right? So that's in my mind, like every single time that I'm going through these references, like I'm paying attention to the time and the place and who's there, right? And I say this is that, so by the time I get over into the States, I know that I have to pay close attention to the brews that these references are talking about, because sometimes it could be talking about white Ashkenazi Jews, which I'm not professing that we're related to the white Ashkenazi Jews, or it could be talking about the black Spanish and Portuguese brews, which is where most of my research lies. And there are some other brews that are out there as well. I think in some of these references, it even mentions the Bavarian Jews or brews. I'm not talking about the Bavarian brews at all, right? So just a quick writer's note, right, or presenter's note, that as we're going through this, pay attention to the Spanish and Portuguese brews. Don't get hung up like when it starts talking about Ashkenazi Jews, like if it mentions Sheftal or Sheftel, whatever those guys' name is. Those are Ashkenazi Jews, right? Those are white Jews. We're not talking about those guys. All right. So in the previous presentations, I like to start off by giving people like a good domain knowledge of what the topic is. Like, and you may not know it, but you basically see it like every time you see like National Geographic, right? If they're talking about Israel, or if they're talking about some African tribe, they're going to give you the background of that tribe, right? They're going to give you all the information. Then they're going to go in on the specific topic that they're talking about, and that's my approach, right? So as we were talking about the the church, the Savannah church, I didn't want to just start with the Savannah church. I just didn't want to start with the pews and the breaking down the scripts and all that other stuff. I wanted to make sure, everyone had a good domain knowledge before we walked through the front door of the church. And when we did that, I started off by showing the audience that early on when the colony of Georgia was started, right, that the Brews were part of that first batch of colonists, right? The first colonists was there. Then you had like these 40 and 40 something Brews show up, and actually I think I have it on the screen here where it talked about let me see if I can find a good place to start here. Bear with me here for a second. Here, a little bit out of order. Yeah. All right.
No, you're good. Take your time, brother, man.
All right. No, I grabbed these slides from the old presentation. This one's talking about constituting as they did. Nearly 1/3 of the actual settlers, they had a large congregation. Accordingly, they rented a house, Market Square in Savannah for their synagogue, to which they gave the name McVeigh Assemblage of Israel, and where religious services were regularly held for some years. And this comes from a body of work called the Settlement of Jews in North America. And this isn't the one I'm looking for, but at least from this one, you can see that this one starts to get into where they were meeting, what part of town they were in. Like this next reference comes from the Jews of Georgia in colonial times. I believe this one was published in the early 1900s, like 1905 or something like that. And I pulled this one out because I just wanted to give the audience an idea of where the Jews were living in Savannah, because that becomes key, because the church that we're talking about, it's not as if it's cordoned off, right? It's in a neighborhood of some sort, right? And that neighborhood is made up of people, right? And those people will go to the church, right? So I wanted to start focusing in on where this church was located, not only where this church was located, but also the people that were in the neighborhood of the church. And so I started off by showing, folks that these Brews, mostly Spanish and Portuguese Brews, were in the neighborhood of the church, because when they showed up, they were forced to reside or live on the west side of Savannah. And that's what this reference is saying. It says, on the west side of Savannah lies the township of the Jews. And I gave more than one reference on that. And for this, I pulled out the Jewish Virtual Library. So now this is not a primary research reference, but I did want to at least show you that this information is in mainstream, right? It's understood like where they are. There are people writing, reports on it, documentaries on it, and they're pretty much saying the same thing. The Jews were there. This is where they lived. They lived near Ellis Square. Of course, the Ellis Square is on the same street that the church is on, and it's probably like four, if my count's right, four squares, blocks away from the church. But I just wanted to show you that at least that the meeting place of the Brews and the meeting place of the church was close. And then also wanted to bring out the a map just to kind of give you a visual of where it is, and pointed out that on the map you'll see a couple of circles. The circle on the left is where you can find the First African Baptist Church, and then on the right is the rough location of where the Spanish and Portuguese Brews were. And then in the green, this represented the area that the Spanish and Portuguese Brews were living. So just wanted to show everyone that this church was smack dab in the middle of an area of the neighborhood of the Spanish and Portuguese Brews. Not only that, this is some new information that will, like I said, God willing, it will make it into one of the follow-up videos that's coming out. But this is a reference or a map, and I was actually looking for the actual reference name. So God willing, I'll post that. But this is a map of. Let me show you the map key at the bottom right. And if you can't see it, it says area of heaviest concentration of Negroes. And this is a map of Savannah, Georgia, right? Old map. And just to show you that also, like if you look at our previous map, like this is where the Spanish and Portuguese brews were, right? Left side, west side of Savannah. And then when we look at maps to show where the Negroes live, it's the same place, the exact same place, right? And what you'll see there is that little, I don't know if you can see that, the little green highlight, that's the rough location of the church, right? It's the rough location of the church. And then off to you can't see it on this map, but off to the left is where the rice plantation or the rice fields were, right? This is where the Negroes would go and work on the plantations, like further off to the left on that map. So again, just wanted to give the audience an understanding of who was in the neighborhood, what was going on, just to let the audience know that there were, initially the mix of Jews in that area did change, because at this point in time, you do have Black Jews and you have white Jews living in the same spot, right? They're living in the same, and they're both in Savannah at this time. You have Ashkenazi Jews and you have Spanish and Sephardic Jews, right?
Real quick, rewind and say that one more time for the people, just so they don't miss that, because I think that's real key to what you're saying.
Right. So in Savannah at this time, I mean, and this is, early on in the 1700s, you have two Jews living in Savannah. You have the white Jews, which are the Ashkenazi Jews, and you have what I refer to as the Black Jews, the brown Jews, the Sephardic Jews, in the same area at the same time.
So if I'm correct, I should be hearing everything you're saying from here on out through that lens, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Now I'm going to try my best to focus on the Spanish and Portuguese Jews, because that's my point of interest when it comes to this information. However, you're right. I do want people to be aware that there are at least two types of Jews there in the city. All right. And because as certain events happen in Savannah, like when whether it's the Revolutionary War that kicks off, or when the English go down to I think it was St. Augustine, where the Spanish are, and they antagonize the Spanish, and a lot of the Spanish brews who had just fled Spain, they just fled Spain, came all the way across think about it this way. They fled, they left Spain because they were fleeing the Inquisition, came over to England, crossed the Atlantic, land over, finally make it to the New World, which is at this point in time in Savannah, Georgia. They're like, whoo, man, we finally made it. And then here the English, go down there and start messing with the Spaniards, and they're like, oh man, we don't want no part of this. So what they do is that they end up leaving and going up to South Carolina. They go up to Charleston. This is the Spanish and Portuguese brews. And some of them do, some of them come back, but a lot of them did go up to South Carolina, and a lot of them did stay up there. And this is why South Carolina, Charleston in particular, is a hub for Black Portuguese brews. But that's, like I said, y'all willing, we'll get into that in greater detail in some of these videos that are coming up next. But as far as we're concerned, we know that we have a mix of brews. We know that they are, right in the neighborhood of the church. So now we are ready to start talking about the church. Now, one of the criticisms was, what, brother? When we look up the Spanish and Portuguese brews in the U.S., we find white folks. We find Caucasians. We don't find dark people. Well, and I'm just going to kind of reiterate something that I've been saying for years, and that is, when doing this research, you'll always hear me say things like, always use old references. And what I mean by old references, like you pull up a book, make sure that book, I usually say from the 1800s, but usually if the publication date is older than the 1800s, the better, because and if that make sure that book is referring to the Spanish and Portuguese brews, because the likelihood of you finding a Black brew in there is very high, right? It drops down the higher you go, right? And the problem that I was running into when I was researching the Spanish and Portuguese brews in Georgia at this time is we're looking at a date of the mid 1700s, right? And then the changeover, from black Jews to white Jews occurs roughly, you can think of it as like in the mid 1800s, right? So that gave me a short window to find references in that window that talked about the brews, where I could find them, find some references to black folks, right? Because I know, and I tell people, I know for sure that if you use new references that are from the 1850s or higher, from 1900s or 2000s, you're definitely going to, and you start pulling out individual Sephardic brews, you will definitely get a Caucasian back. You can take that to the bank, right? But praise the Most High. I'm gonna give a shout out to this brother in a minute, because some of this stuff that I'm bringing out is stuff that he had brought out like a year ago, and just to show you that Most High has separate people working on this thing from different angles, and when we come together, man, we got this thing covered. But one of the just to get back to some of the criticisms. One of the criticisms was when we try to pull up the Spanish and Portuguese brews at this time, using new references, we get Caucasians. Two, the other thing people brought up was, well, you know what? When we pull up these white Spanish and Portuguese brews, they were slave owners. Y'all willing, we will get into that in this next video like you wouldn't believe. But that was another criticism, right? And one of the things I do want to educate our community on is the slavery that occurred, or as far as between people of color, right? And think of it this way. Let's say, for instance, if slavery kicked off in the U.S. today, right? Everybody is a slave. You were the first person out of your family to make it out. You were a free man, but you wanted to free your family. What was the way for you to free your family? You would have to go and buy your family's freedom, right? You would have to save up money, purchase, whoever that was in your family, and then you would be the slave owner of that person. And this was going on in the South, and like I said, y'all willing, we will get into that. But that was one of the criticisms was that they said, hey, brother, when we look at these Spanish and Portuguese brews, they own slaves. We were like, yes, they own slaves. And this will get you, not only did they own slaves, because we're talking about the first African Baptist church, right? Let's look at the first African Baptist church. All right. So you can see hopefully you can see the reference on the screen. It says slave owners. Slave owners. So since we're talking about the first African Baptist church, let's see if anybody at the first African Baptist church owned slaves. All right. So let's take a look. And we're gonna get the page number on the next slide. It says, oh, let me go back to the reference so you can see that. Yeah, free blacks in antebellum Savannah and economic profile, the Georgia Historical Quarter, right? Georgia Historical Society. All right. And on this one, it says the two most affluent free blacks in Savannah, however, were men. One a drayman by vocation and preacher, by avocation. Andrew Marshall. Now, if you don't know, Andrew Marshall was the pastor at the first African Baptist church. I'm gonna say it again. Andrew Marshall was the pastor at the first African Baptist church. Let's read it. It says, and the other was a fisherman who owned more land and slaves than any other black in the county. In addition to being a successful businessman and an inspiring religious leader, Marshall, talking about the preacher, the first African Baptist church, was also the most influential black Savannan of the antebellum period. A former South Carolina slave. Now, he himself was a slave who moved to Savannah in 1766 at the age of 10. Marshall gained his freedom during the early national period and operated a profitable dray business, employing many free laborers, although he did own one slave. Preacher of the first African Baptist church. Just gonna let that sink in for a little bit, right? Now it says he owned them for a short period in 1813, but just for those that would say that, hey brother, these Spanish and Portuguese brews, they own slaves, so they had to be Caucasian. No, brother, that's not how it worked. That is not how it works. So hopefully you can see the pastor of the first African Baptist church owned a slave, right? This was a thing in the South. Y'all willing, we will get into it in the next video, because this wasn't a one-hit wonder. This was like the norm in the South in certain areas, and we will get into it. But let's see if we can, I just want to finish this up. This references up. It says, although he did own one slave for a short period in 1830, money from business was invested wisely in real estate and stock in the local bank. Marshall succeeded his uncle, Andrew Bryan, as the pastor of the first African Baptist church. All right. So the point in bringing out this reference again is to show you that blacks own slaves. Not only did blacks own slaves, the pastor of the first African Baptist church owned a slave. So the argument of, hey, they own a slave, they can't be black, take that off the table. All right, hopefully that's crushed. All right, and then the next, one of the other arguments that was brought up was, hey, brother, like I said before, hey, brother, when we look at the Spanish and Portuguese brews, they're Caucasian. And I agree to a certain extent, because I like I keep saying, depends on what reference you use, depends on what time, what the publication date of that reference that you're using. For example, let's take Samuel Nunes, Nunes. A physician, was one of the first Jewish immigrants to the Georgia colony in 1733. So he was on that first boat, right? So, and he was a well-known brew at the time, because he was a doctor. Because when he got there was sickness going around, and so he was the man on the spot, healed a lot of people, and Oglethorpe loved him some brews at that point, and he was like, the colonists wanted them to leave. Oglethorpe wanted them to stay. He was like, no, these brothers are staying, right? But just wanted to show you that Samuel Nunes, we're talking about the Nunes family, that they were in Georgia, right? And they were there from the beginning, and he has a lot of descendants that are there. And this is just another reference showing the same thing, Georgia land and people. On the arrival of Dr. Nunes and family in London, the settlement of Georgia and the fine climate and soil of the country was subjects of much discussion. The ship upon which Governor Oglethorpe was returning to his new settlement was about to sail. So basically, the Nunes family got to London. The ship that was heading off to Savannah, Georgia, was about to take off. So basically the Nunes family hopped on the ship and was part of that first load of brews. The doctor and his family, not one of whom could speak English, not one of them could speak English, embarked as passengers. All right. So this is the shout out I want to give to this brother. I don't know if you guys ever came across his website, but he has some outstanding information on things going on in America. Whether it's black, the swarthy Spanish and Portuguese brews, the Huguenots, the Moors, you name it. So if you guys get a chance, check out this brother's website, because a lot of this information that I'm getting ready to go over, review with you, you'll find on his website, right? And then what I'm trying to do is we call it land back. Try to land back on the work good work that he's put in, and take it to the next level. But this brother has really put in some work. So if you get a chance, check out this brother's website. He will tell you all you need to know about the Sephardic Jews. All right. So as far as like the question of, all right, so are these Sephardic Jews, are they white, or are they black? The thing I appreciated about this brother is he cracked the code as far as figuring out where to go to find out if the brews are white or black. I'm over here looking in archive. I'm over here looking in some of these other repositories that I use, and I didn't think to look in Ancestry.com. And this is it's funny, because this is full circle for me, because I started off, like when I first started my journey and trying to figure out who I was, I started off with Ancestry. So this was a bit of a homecoming for me. But basically what he says is like, if you want to know these brews are, go and look at the census, right? And a census at a certain time, like the 1850 census, the 1830 census. I want to say if you go a little bit earlier than 1830, you don't get the descriptions in the census. If you go later than, I'd say 1850, then you risk like the Nunes families in these census, they go from one color to the next. Like we're going to read here what this Nunes family is, but then you're going to see that when we get to the later census, they flip. Like they'll switch them from black to white, right? But what you're looking at is a slave. They call it a slave schedule. So basically, it's a census of the slaves, right? And if you can't read the header at the top of the column, it says free white persons. So the way it works is that they'll put the names on the left hand side, and then if a person has a free white male, like this little column here represents the males, and it has like the different ages of the males, and based on how many people there, they'll put a little mark in the column. So you'll look down here, you'll see Charles Nunez, right? Charles Nunez, same family, and no marks under white slaves, like no marks under free white persons, right? But then if you keep going, you'll have another section that says slaves, and this section says free people of color. I have a better view of this in a following slide, so you'll see that it actually does say that. But slaves and free people of color, and you'll see that the Nunez has 2 slaves and a bunch of free people of color. 1, 2, 3, 4, if those are ones in there, right? So Nunez is listed in his household as not having any whites, but having slaves and people of color, right? And the Nunez family are the Spanish and they're a prominent Spanish and Portuguese brew family, right? And even here, you'll see that I'm pulling up different family members, Nunez, because they ended up spelling it different ways. And in here, she shows up as mulatto, but in subsequent ones, you'll see that the Nunez, one time they'll be called mulatto, one time they'll be called black. And I think I have a slide for that. But the takeaway here is that if you want to find out the color of the brews, the Spanish and Portuguese brews in Georgia, right? Go to ancestry.com, pull up the census, start off with 1830s, 1850, right around that time period, and you can go and see what you find, right? So this is, like I said, the work that the brother did. There's also some other books or resources out there. He brought this out. This is a book called The Irish Found in South Carolina, the 1850 census. So again, this is pulling data from the census. And one of the other famous Jewish families was the DaCostas, the DaCosta family. And when you look at the DaCosta, right, in the census, they list them as mulatto, right? All of them, every last one of them, right? Although I think think there is one. Oh, this WP, but that's William P. He's listed as mulatto too. They just don't have it listed right here. All right, so just wanted to show you that they are listed as people of color. The brews are listed as people of color. So this is another census. And this one, I think I can't really tell. I think it says from 1860. But in this one, I'm not focusing on any family in particular. But what I want to call to your attention is these are slave owners, right? It's just saying slave owners, right? And you'll see where it has the name of the slave owner, and then it gives a description of the slave owner. They'll give a B if he's black. They'll give an M if he's mulatto. So what I wanted to call people's attention to is that when you look at the census will tell you that blacks own blacks, right? You have a black, it says he's a black slave. I think is an F for female, and she owns. There's another black slave, right, that she owns. Or I'm not sure if that's I guess that's a female. I think that's an F in the column number 4. But same thing all the way down. Next one has an M for mulatto, and she owns all the other mulattoes, right? And it's just a running theme. You can look at this whole thing. This is okay. It's from the 1860 census, and yes, the DaCostas are listed there, right? W.P. DaCosta, and he's listed as B, black, right? And so, like I said, you can go on and on down, but just wanted to show you that in these census, you'll see that blacks own blacks. Basically, they were owning their family members, right? They were owning their family members. Or if they were running a farm, they would employ other slaves to run the farm. I think how people get it twisted is that they assume that these brothers were treating their other brothers the same way that the whites were treating them, and that's not necessarily the case. Not to say that there weren't any cases out there like that, but we do have references that talk about how benevolent these black owners were, right? Because a lot of them were rescuing or redeeming, that's a term in the script, right? They were redeeming their family members out of slavery, right? All right. So hopefully we got that squared away. Like I said, y'all willing, in the video to come, we'll have a few more reviews of these census records, just to show you that the Spanish and Portuguese brews were in fact black, right? And we're going to use the census records to prove that out. Along with some other references, and then the other discussion that we had coming out of the whole Pew, the Pew review and the Pew presentation was we were saying that we were finding Arabic on the pew, we were finding Hebrew on the pew, and me and the brothers we were talking about this. I don't know a single person that has looked at every single pew. If you guys know, let me know. But I don't know one person that's going through that entire church and catalog every single pew, right? Not only catalog it, put a reference number for each pew, right? For each pew that you review, have a reference number. Like, this is pew number 1, or this is pew number 1, this is pew 45, this is pew 62, right? Because the reason why that's required or necessary is, what I'm seeing is that when people talk about these pews, oftentimes they're talking about different pews. Somebody was talking about pew 5, right? And then somebody's talking about pew 6, and they're making that, and we were making that the representation of of all the pews in the church. So I'd like to give a disclaimer at this point in time, and that is, in the church, one of the things that me and the brothers were talking about was that we would expect for there to be different types of languages on the pews. And the reason why I say that is because when we looked at at just the Hebrews alone that were coming into the city, on that first ship that DaCosta was on, and we said that there were Ashkenazi Jews on there, and there were Spanish and Portuguese Jews on there, right? There were Bavarian Jews on there. And not only that, the entries on those pews were made over time. Like, they weren't all made at the same time, right? It's kind of like graffiti, right? You have a graffiti on the wall, and somebody's adding to that graffiti over time by different people. So just want to put that disclaimer out there that we're not shocked to find different languages on these pews. But one of the things that I do want to set the record straight on is, the question is there Hebrew on the pew? Like, that's the thing. And then there's the question of, well, is it Arabic on the pew? And the argument to put forth that it was Arabic on the pew. Some presented Arabs, certain slaves were deemed as Arabs in the area. Like and I want to say in Sapelo Island, there was a slave there that spoke Arabic. That even wrote Arabic. I'm trying to remember it was the Low Country website that had I think they listed like four slaves that spoke Arabic, right? But I guess the narrative is that with these Arab slaves that are out there, this is the influence that we see in the church. Now, what I like to what I think that we're missing from the conversation is like the history behind the slaves, like as far as like how the slaves are brought over into the States, And I like my, how my brother touched on it in one of the other videos was like over in Africa, when you look at the history, and actually we're going to cover this, Yah willing, in one of the movies that's coming out. When we talk about the history over in Africa, at some point in time, the west coast of Africa was like Hebrews. Those are brews. Then the Arabs came in and they conquered, converted. A lot of the kings switched over to Islam, right? And by default, the brews that were scattered throughout that region, if they were under that king, then we would expect for them to have Arabic influences, right? But the question is, who or what slaves are in Savannah, right? So do we have a bunch of Arabic slaves in Savannah? Is that what we're dealing with, or are we dealing with a bunch of and actually those Arabic slaves still could be Hebrews, right? Because we had a lot of Hebrews that switched over to being Arabs. But the question is, who is in Savannah, right? That's what we want to know, right? Who is in Savannah? And there's a couple of different ways that we can figure this out, right? Because we can get very specific about this. And so, one of the things I brought out, I'm trying to think. I had a reference on this because I was going to cover it. I don't know if it ever made it into any videos, but this was just another reference on it. But I did have something about it, and that is just like when the transatlantic slave trade started, like there were certain laws that were in place that prohibited or encouraged certain types of slaves, right? And the whole thing, with the Arabs or Muslims being the majority or some sort of majority in the slave trade, there were certain things in place that pushed against that. Like, for instance, not only did the Muslims have their own ban, as far as I think they call it Sharia law. I think I have it on the next slide. But Sharia law prevented them from sending another Muslim into slavery. Like that was the rule that they were supposed to work from. That they were supposed to govern. How they got their slaves. Didn't always go into effect, right? You did have some people bending the rules when it came to that. And actually the Muslims that were given as example over in the States were examples of exceptions to that. I think one of them was the son of a king, right? Because that's one king conquered another king, and then the son was grabbed and they shipped him off. We want you out of here, right? So that was one, what I call exception. And the other one was he was an actual slave trader. So he had just taken a bunch of slaves to the slave market, and on his way back, he got snatched, right? So I would consider that an exception. But that's one of the four, or two of the four that were on that website that I was looking at the other day. But in general, and that's what I'm going to talk about. In general, there were bans on Muslims being on these ships, right? So the Muslim bans, as you can see, this is from the Smithsonian. Muslims were banned from the Americas as early as the 16th century. Long before today's anxiety about terror attacks, Spain and England feared that enslaved Africans would be more susceptible to revolt if they were Muslims, right? And I think I have the primary, not necessarily on this one, but it's a primary that talks about the Sharia law, which is not this one. This one's just talking about the uprising. Just the uprising was quickly suppressed, but it prompted the newly crowned Charles V of Spain to exclude from the Americas slaves suspected of Islamic leanings. He blamed the revolt on their radical ideology rather than the harsh realities of living a life of slavery. So, like I said, this is just in general. There are a lot. There were some that broke the rules that they didn't really go by the rules, and they just grab whoever there's grabbing. And I guess a good example would be that slave trader that got snatched, right? But I'm just speaking in general of the laws that were in place that were preventing this from happening. And like I was saying earlier, I know this isn't a good reference. This is like a WikiZer or something like that. But I do, like I said, Most High willing, in the video, I will put a better reference in here. But I did want to show you that Sharia law, where it says Sharia law, and that's the one in orange, regarded as legal slaves only those non-Muslims who were in prison or brought beyond the borders of Islamic rule. or sons or daughters of slaves already in captivity. So I just wanted to show you that it was governed from both sides. It was governed from the people that were the man hunters, the Muslims, the Arabs, and it was governed by the people that had the ships and that were sending them over, right? So, but like I said before, some weren't going by the rules. So we do know Arabs made it over to the States, based off of these references. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is just to show you that is just to give you an idea of what to expect by the time we get over into the Americas. Because not only that, and I'm actually, the reason why I have a blank slide for the next one, because I forgot to put it in here. But if you look at the transatlantic slave trade, of as far as about per volume, as far as where the slaves came from, people will tell you, the historians will tell you that the majority of the slaves that came over to the States came from the Angola area, right? Or maybe they were Igbos, right? Between those two areas. And in the Angola area, you don't have a whole lot of Islam in that area. You do up in the north, in the northern, West African area, but definitely not in Angola. So definitely by the time you're pulling from there, we don't really expect to see a whole lot of Arabs in the slave trade. All right. But the other reference I wanted to bring out is remember, we're looking at this because we want to figure out who's in Savannah. The slaves that are in Savannah, who are they? Are they a bunch of Arabs, right? Because somebody has to make the writings on the pews, right? I mean, we can't really separate the people from the pews. So to figure out who's writing on, what to expect as far as writing on the pews, we're going to look at the slaves that built the church, and what their makeup was, right? And to do that, we're going to look at a couple of things. So in Savannah, Georgia, there's a couple of places where I like to tell people that you'll want to check out. One is, if you ever get a chance to go to Savannah, you definitely want to check out the church, right? The First African Baptist Church. The other place that you'll want to check out in Savannah is a place called Pinpoint Heritage Museum. That's Pinpoint Heritage Museum. It is also in Savannah. Now that museum it's about slaves, right? They specifically focus on slaves called Gullah slaves, right? And they'll tell you all you need to know about the slaves in Savannah, right? Because they'll tell you that they were the descendants of those slaves, and that even the land that the museum is on was previously held by their slave forefathers, right? So that's another place that if you're ever going to Savannah, you definitely want to check out, because they'll give you a good understanding of what the slaves in Savannah were, right? And they were Gullah slaves, right? And the beauty of knowing that they were Gullah slaves is that a lot of studies have already taken place on the Gullah people, and these are on the slaves. And one of the studies that has gone forth on the slaves of Savannah was the language, right? And so this is a study by Dr. Lorenzo Dow Turner, right? And he does an in-depth study on the Gullah language, right? It says Africanisms in the Gullah dialect. Dr. Lorenzo Dow Turner, he and basically what he does is that he goes and studies the Gullah language in depth. Now, just to give you some information on his background. Now, he does go and study Arabic. He goes to, I believe it was Yale University, and studies Arabic. And basically what he's going to do is that he's spending time with the Gullah people. He's going to catalog their vocabulary. And for each of their vocabulary words, he's going to figure out where those words in their language came from, right? So if it's Arabic, he'll say it's Arabic. If it's Yoruba, he'll say it's Yoruba. If it's Angola, he'll say it's Angola. And so basically, he goes through and catalogs roughly 4,000 Gullah words and breaks it down into those categories. And let's see if we can read some of this information on your screen, where it says, Turner drew on many African languages for comparison to Gullah. Most of these he studied in London or Paris in 1936 and 37. By interviewing native speakers and by consulting dictionaries, grammars, and other linguistic works. He listed 21 languages, page 2, and situates them on the map. He cites 11 other languages, including Arabic, in which he found forms that represented plausible sources for Gullah words, right? And if you go over to the next page, it says, finally, in 1949, after nearly 2 decades of painstakingly sifting his data and clarifying and refining his arguments, Turner published Africanisms in the Gullah dialect. His most memorable and influential work, it took approximately 4,000 words and names in Gullah, and identified their possible or probable African antecedents. So basically, where those words came from, right? Africanisms was a model for comparative linguistic studies. It became one of the most widely reviewed books of its time in American linguistics, and was recognized immediately as groundbreaking, right? So I just wanted to give him his props. So he was, well renowned. Actually, this is a brother, that did this, and just want to share some of the results from that. Actually, let me see if I got it on the next page. All right. So basically, in his book, from pages roughly like 40, from page 48 all the way to page 208, all it is an entry of the. Let me see if I can pull it up on the internet here, because I do want you to see it if you can. It's one of those. They don't have a digital book. I literally have the physical book in front of me, but I wanted to see if I could share some of that with you. So hang on one second. But as I'm trying to pull it up, let me just talk through it. So like I said, he has roughly 4,000 words, and what he does is that for each word he'll tell you if that word is a Yoruba word, or if it's if it's an Angola word, or if it's an Arabic word. Some words will have two. Some words may have two possible roots, right? As far as where it came from. And one of the analysis that we did was basically went through all 4,000 words. Went through all 4,000 words, and what we did was that we identified the words that were Arabic, right? So basically, if these people were Arabic-speaking people, we would expect a high number of Arabic words in their vocabulary, right? But if they're not, we would expect to see a low number of Arabic words in their vocabulary. And just to give you, some rough estimates of the findings. So out of 4,000 words, we found roughly 28 words of Arabic root. Right. So if you have a calculator, take 28, divide it by 4,000, multiply it times 100. Take 28, divide it by 4,000, multiply it times 100, and you should get something around like 0.7. Less than 1% of the words were Arabic words, right? And that's the beauty of being able to take a detailed look of the language of the Gullah people in Savannah, right? In that area, right? So just want to help drive home the point of who these slaves are, what they're speaking, because we not only find I missed the point that now one of the things that he did not compare in his body of work was he did not compare Hebrew. He compared Arabic, but he did not compare those words against Hebrew. So that was I wish that's one of the things that I wish he did, but he did not do that. So I can't provide any Hebrew numbers from that, but I at least can give you I can at least give you the numbers of Arabic in the Gullah word. So that's something that you can do. Like I said, if you go to Amazon, like I said, they don't necessarily have a digital copy. I've looked around for it. I'm trying to see if I can share my screen here. Let me see if I can share this. Hang on, fam. says stop sharing. And let me do this. Hang on 1 second. So I'm going to see if I can switch screens. Let's see. Share screen, application window. And where is it? All right, let me do that. Let me do it this way. So hopefully, can you see the? Hopefully, you can see the book.
Yes, sir. It's shared right now.
Okay, but this is the book on Amazon. Let's see. Look inside the book. I was just trying to see if I could get to some of the vocabulary pages in there. But yeah, okay, yeah. Just bear with me, fam. I think y'all willing on the video. I'll pull out some of the. I do screenshots of some of the actual vocabulary words on there. But basically, like I said, the thing that I'm trying to drive home with this reference is to show you the percentage of Arabic in the vocabulary of the slaves in the Savannah area, right? And just to show you that it is 0.7%. All right. So that was one. That's one thing, and then the other is, unfortunately, they don't have any. They don't have any vocabulary listed on the free preview. Yeah, sorry about that, fam. Yeah, just be on the lookout on the video. Y'all will it. I'll stick it in there. Oh, here we go. Here it is. Here you go. So this is an example. All right, and you'll see the word off to the left, and then what he does is that he'll put a T in there, like the T is for twee. Like this word is a twee word, or if the word is a Yoruba word, he'll put a Y there, right? And so all you have to do if you buy this book from Amazon, start from the first page of vocabulary, go through each one, because hey, your brother may have missed one. I got a busy house, so your brother may have missed one. So you can come behind and do your own check. But the thing you'll want to look for is go through every single. Oh, here you go. So here's the abbreviations. Very first one you'll see at the top is Arabic. So you'll see an AR for Arabic, and you'll see that, like, you see where it says Y. If I drop down here where it says Y, Yoruba, right? And that's how it's broken down. Like for the first one, you'll see the F, and that's says for, is that Fulani? Oh, the Fanti, right? It's a Fanti word, and it has a T on it, and that's a twee word, Gold Coast. All right. So anyway, if you get a chance, check out the book. It breaks down the language, gives the root of where those words come from, and and you can see what percentage of Arabic is found in the language of the slaves in that area. All right, so that's one key point, and we switch back over to the presentation. I won't keep it too much longer, family, but I do want to make sure I cover some of these talking points before we wrap up. But let me switch over to PowerPoint. All right.
There you go.
Okay, so Black Jews. All right, let's see. Black Jews and religious. Let's see what I was pulling this one from. Okay. All right. So not only do we have we have a language of the slaves. So now we talk about the language of the slaves in the area of the church, right? The language of the slaves in the area of the church, right? You go to Savannah, you got a Pinpoint Heritage Museum. They'll tell you that the slaves in Savannah were Gullah slaves. So we turned around and said, okay, well, let's look at the language of the Gullah slaves. Then we looked at a body of work by Dr. Lorenzo Dow Turner, and he cataloged over 4,000 words. We saw that Arabic was 0.7. So we don't expect to see a whole lot of, or we don't expect it to have a whole lot of Arabic influence, at least from these slaves, but we're going to continue to build a profile of these slaves. And so one of the things that I did want to take a look at was the pull this up here. In addition to the language was two things. One is, so when you think of slaves working in the South, working out in the field, we all know about those Negro spirituals, right? Picking cotton, doing rice, whatever, singing Wade in the Water, or, Kumbaya. And of course, Kumbaya, that is a Gullah slave song. And of course, Kumbaya is 100% Hebrew. Those are Those are 100% Hebrew words. So part of what you're going to see in the, y'all willing in the video is an analysis of all the slave songs that these slaves that are associated with these Gullah slaves, right? We have a nice little long list of slave songs to see if we see any other influences such as Arabic in these songs, right? So far we don't see any, but we haven't. That's still in flight, right? The other point of analysis that we want to do is, is also show you what was going on not only in Savannah but in the South with slaves at that time, because there was something specific that was going on in regards specifically with Black preachers in the South. There was something specifically going on with Black preachers. And actually, I'm going to let me see if I can skip here, because here it is. Okay. So let's read about what's specifically going on with Black preachers in the South during this time. And I guess I can read a little bit of this. It says, in the first months of 1879, there was a massive migration of some 5,000 Blacks to the northern territories of the United States, mainly Kansas and Oklahoma. This exodus was of despairing Blacks seeking a refuge. Oh, sorry, I didn't show you the reference. It's called Black Jews, the Religious Challenge, or Politics versus Religion, Cambridge University. And it's a relatively new contemporary reference. All right. So, but I just wanted to show you, like, I don't consider this a source reference, but I do have other references behind this one. So this reference does a good job of summing it up, but then we're going to take a look at at some of the older references that this reference is based off of. If that makes sense. All right, so we're going to read this just to get an idea of what was going on. Then we're going to look at some specific older references that support what this is saying. All right, so basically this is talking about, like I was saying, it says it's talking about Blacks fleeing the South, leaving into an exodus, and it says this exodus was of despairing Blacks seeking a refuge, a place where their political rights would mean something, where they would be free from economic exploitation, and above all from the dangerous activities of the Ku Klux Klan. One of the members of the exodus was Benjamin Pap Singleton, an elderly and colorful man who led a group of 300 Blacks to Cherokee County in Kansas. There they founded a colony called Singleton's Colony. Singleton called himself the Moses of the exodus of colored people. All right, so here's the part I want to draw your attention to. It says, from 1900 onward, North and South Carolina were overrun by Black preachers who were propagating a doctrine according to which the lost tribe of the house of Israel was none other than the Negroes. Let me read it again. From 1900 onwards, North and South Carolina were overrun by Black preachers who were propagating a doctrine according to which the lost tribe of the house of Israel was none other than the Negroes. So we're speaking specifically about preachers, right? Speaking specifically about preachers and what was going on in that area at the time, right? And it says, although this might at first seem an odd claim, it can be seen as reflecting the beliefs that some black slaves had held during their captivity when they were interrogated on their origins, their destiny. A historical example supports this hypothesis. A slave uprising took place in Richmond, Virginia, at the beginning of the 19th century, which was led by a slave called Gabriel Prosser, an outstanding personality who had acquired some knowledge of the Bible. He frequently referred to it in order to convince his brothers that they were the descendants of the Israelites and that God would free them from slavery, and as he had their ancestors. So the point here is that there's two points. One is, so during the time of this church, you guys should be familiar with some of the uprisings like the Nat Turner. I mean, this one mentioned Gabriel, right? Vassy was another one. We're actually going to look at a few of those. But during this time, when slaves were turning against their white masters, when they were putting their lives on the line, right, to uprise, to try to get their freedom, right, to in the face of death, they were calling on the remembrance of Israel. These preachers were reading scriptures talking about Israel. So this goes to that whole self-identification of these black Negroes, of these preachers, of them being Israel, right? And we have a couple of multiple references to help prove the point of this reference that we have out here. And that was from, the Encyclopedia of Virginia. And let's see here, and this is going into Gabriel. So we're just going to read a little bit about Gabriel, because the reference that we read, it brought up Gabriel. So let's take a look at Gabriel. So it says, presently a man named Martin, Gabriel's brother, proposed religious services. Let me see if I can zoom in, because I don't think I can see it. I don't think you can see it. So let me zoom in. All right, there it is. Presently, a man named Martin, Gabriel's brother.
If you can zoom in more, that wouldn't hurt for the crowd.
Okay.
We actually got one request from a sister right quick.
All right. Hopefully it might get a little blurry if I get too.
No, whatever's comfortable. That's all. That's fine. Whatever's comfortable.
All right. Okay. Should be on a little bit better. So presently, a man named Martin, Gabriel's brother, proposed religious services, caused the company to be duly seated, and began an impassioned exposition of scripture, bearing upon the perilous theme. The Israelites were glowingly portrayed as a type of successful resistance to tyranny. And it was argued that now as then, God would stretch forth his arm to save and would strengthen 100 to overthrow 1,000. Thus passed the witness stated this preparatory meeting. So basically, they're just saying that scripture, the reference to Israel, was referenced when they were trying to muster the troops, right, to go out to rebel, to put their lives on the line. This is what they were using. They were using references to Israel, right? And then this one is from the Library of Congress. You can see the reference there. Let me see if I can zoom in on this one. Negro Plus is an account of the late intended insurrection among a portion of the blacks in the city of Charleston, South Carolina. All right. So now we're going to talk about Vassy. So during this, we call it an insurrection. We all know about insurrections, right? But during this insurrection, it says, and it's talking about Vassy. So this is another slave, right? So, what is he talking about to try to muster, get the troops, the slaves encouraged to turn against their masters and put their lives on the line? It says, at this meeting, Vassy said, we were to take the guardhouse and the magazines to get arms, that we ought to rise up against the whites to get our liberties. He was the first to rise up and speak, and he read to us from the Bible how the children of Israel were delivered out of Egypt from bondage. He said that the uprising would take place last Sunday night week. All right. So just want to drive home the fact that what was going on in the South at that time, they were making references to Israel to rebel against the white slave masters, right? So that's another dynamic of the slaves, because we know we're specifically speaking about slaves that are uprising, right? And let's see, I think I have another one here. Yeah, this is another uprising, but I believe this one's out west, and it's about the Knights of Liberty, and they call it the Knights of Tabor. And let me see where I can start on this one. It says, this organization was known among its members by the name of Knights of Tabor, a name that was gave the members courage, that God was with Barak and Deborah in Israel's great battle with the immense army of Sisera. They, with only 10,000 men, assembled on Tabor to fight Jabin's army, and if possible, win the victory and break the bondage of the Israelites. God was with Israel and gave the victory to the bondsmen, though they were opposed by 20 times their number. Our cause was just, and we believed in the justice of the God of Israel and the rights of man. Under the old name of Tabor, we resolved to make full preparation to strike the blow for liberty. Right. So reference after reference, they're going back to the Bible, right? Talking about Israel, right? All right, and so now we've talked about the the insurrections that were occurring during that time in the South by the slaves, bringing up references to Israel to give the motivation to fight against their slave masters. I did want to come back to these references where not only were they doing that, they were also calling themselves Israel. Just want to let that sink in for a minute. So not only are they bringing up Israel when they go off to battle against their oppressors, they're also calling themselves Israel. And we brought out some of this in some of those other videos where they be Hebrews that I released on 1 and 2. But I do want to show you that there are more. Like, that's not just it. There are more references out there, and I don't know if you can see that. So I'm gonna zoom in on this one. All right, so this is the reference, the life, experience, and gospel labors of Reverend Richard Allen. So this is a first-hand account, right? Written by myself, right? And this was in 1833. So now we're getting to primary references, right? Primary sources. And all right, let me zoom out. This is on page 9. Let's see here. Next, I think I may have grabbed. It says, I'm gonna catch this one here where it says, I went, and this is talking about the the Reverend, and he's just giving you an account of what he did. And he said, I went from there to Jonathan Bunn's near Bennington, East Jersey. There I labored in that neighborhood for some time. I found him and his family kind and affectionate. He and his dear wife were a father and mother in Israel, right? So he's a pastor, and he's talking about this place in East Jersey, right? So I just want to bring this out just to show you that the reference of slaves or reference of pastors to themselves as Israel wasn't just the South, right? This was all over. And also on page 11, it says, in 1785, the Reverend Richard Watcoat was appointed on Baltimore circuit. So now we're talking about Baltimore. He was, I believe, a man of God. I found great strength in traveling with him, a father in Israel. All right. So hopefully you can see that these people were definitely self-identifying as Israel. And let's look at another primary resource. This one says, the life and religious experience of Jarana Lee, a colored lady, giving an account of her call to preach the gospel, right? So again, we're talking about preachers. Right? And this has direct bearing on the church that we're talking about, because remember, in the previous videos, I read to you where the actual pastor of the First African Baptist Church used the exact same language, right? Where he was referred to as the father in Israel, like the venerable father in Israel, right? That's what the pastor at the Savannah Church was referred to. But now you see that there are other pastors going around referring to each other as mother and father in Israel. All right, so you can see that connection is there. Like that's a definitive connection. So as we go, we take a look at Jarana. I'm sorry for messing up her name, Jarana Lee. So she's a pastor, right? She's going around preaching the gospel. All right, let's look at what she said. She says, I'm gonna pick it up at the top of the paragraph where it says, but 2 days had elapsed after this visit when her sister came for me. So remember, she's given a firsthand account in haste, saying that she believed her brother was then dying and that he had sent for me. I immediately called on Jane Hutt, who was still among us as a mother in Israel, to go with me. All right. So hopefully you can see over and over again. And this is just a review, right? Because this is what I was referring to at the First African Baptist Church, where it says Andrew C. Marshall was born a slave. Remember, we read that he was born a slave and he owned a slave, right? So he was born a slave and he owned a slave. We read that in a previous reference for those that would say, well, if you own a slave, you had to be Caucasian. Like, no, brother. But here we go. It says, he has traveled over a great part of the United States. He has by industry succeeded in purchasing himself and done many benevolent acts among his color, and has given to different institutions several $1,000s. The venerable father in Israel, Andrew C. Marshall, died in Richmond, Virginia, December 7th, 1856, while returning from the north to the people of his charge. All right. So this is, now we brought everything, come full circle and brought it back to the First African Baptist Church, right? And just to show you that the referencing of themselves as being fathers and mothers in Israel was throughout the United States, right? And we saw it in different states, but other than the South, and we see it in the African Baptist Church. And just going to throw one more in here when we're talking about Andrew Bryan. Now he was the founding pastor, and it said when he was commanded not to preach the gospel, he raised his dusky hand, stained in his own blood, drawn by his vile persecutors, and said with a trembling voice, with that manly heroism and Christian courage that the grace of God alone can fan into the burning eloquence, if you would stop me from preaching, cut off my head. This humble statement from our father in Israel. All right, this is another reference to a pastor at the same church. And also, this is the plaque inside the church. So even if you were able to go to the church today, this plaque is still there in the sanctuary, in the front. You know, it's in a prominent location. And this is a commemorative plaque where it references one of the fallen pastors, and it commemorates his passing, where it says, you know, he was born in Marion, Alabama, July 27th, 1850, died in Savannah, Georgia, April 24th, 1900, at the age of 49 years, pastor of the First African Baptist Church, 14 years and 6 months, a prince and a great man, fallen this day in Israel. All right, so Israel. That's in 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 38. All right, so let me see if I have anything else here. Think that's all we're going to share for today. This reference here that's showing up on your screen will, y'all will show up as part of a larger presentation. But just to show you that, as the Portuguese, came into the States, that even in official state documents, like this is the acts and resolves passed by the General Court, that you can find that, like when in this document, like in those legal documents, they define words like when it says, when I say minority, this is what I mean. Or when I say this is what it means. So when it refers to minority, this is back in the day, and it's referring to these people of color. It's interesting when you take a look at the who's in the list. Right, so we expect black, right? We see black, but then you see Portuguese as the people of color. Western Hemisphere, Hispanic, people of color, Asians, people of color, Native American, people of color, and Cape Verde, right? So these aren't Caucasians, right? I just wanted to, like I said, y'all willing, we will get into this in the next. I think I have it in the next Hidden Hebrews video. But I think that's about it, brother. Like I said, this is, we do have a bunch of references just to show that, as the slaves were coming over, people may not know that the Inquisition was actually, they had a base in Sao Tome, or I guess the English named for the St. Thomas. So on the west coast of Africa, the Inquisition was there. Like I tell our people, it's like the Inquisition followed you. I mean, it was over in Spain and Portugal. Then when you went to Africa, they started opening up things in Africa, and then when they started shipping the slaves over to the Americas, the Inquisition followed them over there. And just the only reason why I bring this up is to show you that the slaves that were sent over to the Americas, that they were still being monitored by the Inquisition. And when the Inquisition monitored them, they were very specific. They were very astute bookkeepers of what they were persecuting these slaves that they took from Africa about. And this is just one quick entry where it says, a large number of those accused arrested in the south of the continent arrived from Angola, Guinea, and Sao Tome, where in many cases they were engaged in Jewish practices. But like I said, y'all willing, we'll go into this in later videos. But hopefully I've answered your questions or shed some more additional light on the First African Baptist Church, about their ties to Israel, their self-identity to Israel. It wasn't just them. It was, pastors across the country. And not only that, when they put their lives on the line to turn against their masters, they invoked the name of Israel when they did it. Hallelujah.
All praise to the Most High. Yeah, no, very enjoyable. So, real quick, so something I want to try to understand is you just gave a few places there to where you're saying some people came from, but in your mind, where are the black Jews immigrating from? Because I know you're differentiating between, you're saying there's white Jews, there's black Jews, and then there's the slaves and whatnot, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So where are you? And I'm asking this question because like a lot of people, when they hear Spain and Portugal, right, all they think about is the Iberian Peninsula, right?
Right.
And let me share my screen right quick so I can give a visual to what I'm about to say.
Okay.
So this is can you see my screen?
Yep. So
this is the Portuguese Empire in the 1800s, right? So this is not just the Iberian Peninsula. We're talking about there's spots over in Arabia. There's colonies over in India. There's colonies in you know what I'm saying, in the East Indies. There's
right.
You got Mozambique. You got Southwestern Africa. You know what I'm saying? You have Brazil, etc. Whatnot. All these are places that would constitute as like Portuguese territories when people are immigrating. Or for instance, wait a minute. I don't know if the screen switched. Hold on. All right, we gotta do it like this. Gotta do it like this. And then this is the Spanish territories in the 1800s, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of land right there.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? And a lot of people don't. Yeah. So a lot of people are thinking that you just mean the Iberian Peninsula, but like, it to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense for like a lot of black Jews to be coming from there at that time period. But when you're talking about like all the other places, particularly in Africa, etc., in South America and Central America and whatnot, like I can see where that's very plausible. And at the same point, I'm also doing so because of what you're talking about concerning the Inquisition. Like my mother's people suffered the Inquisition in this country, in Mexico, and in what would now be New Mexico, right? So I can see where people would be fleeing. Like so what I learned from what you were talking about is like there was a lot of people going to Savannah and to South Carolina and whatnot, and so I could see where people would be trying to find a place to flee, and where that would be like a haven over in the western part of the world, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the whole point, because out of all those places they were getting persecuted, South Carolina, Georgia was one of those few places that invited to say, hey, come on, we don't care what your religion is, we won't bother you guys. You can come over here, and then the Brews jumped on that, and that's what caused the influx of Brews from these different places. Because, like you said, they were in the middle of getting persecuted. Like the Inquisition was raging in Spain and Portugal, and like you were talking about, like how did they get over into the Americas? And this is one of the things that I do want to spend some time on, showing like the different routes, because it wasn't just one route. You know what I mean? Like, and depending on which route they took, their experience was different. Like in Spain and Portugal, they told the Brews to get out. They said, if you don't, convert to Christianity, or you can get out, or if you stay here and you don't want to convert to Christianity, we're going to make you a slave. So the ones that stayed and converted to Christianity, they thought they were good, but then the Inquisition kicked off, and then the Inquisition started taking them out and putting them in certain places.
Mm-hmm.
Like it would take them out and put them in Brazil. It would take them out and put them in places in the Central America. You mentioned those Mexico and those other places like that. It would even take them out and put them in places like Angola. Like if you look at the
mm-hmm.
We call the book of the Inquisition like the book of law. Like there's a law book of the Inquisition. One of the names is called the Black Book, and basically what that law book says is like, if you do this, here's the punishment for that. If you do this, here's the punishment for that. And what we find is that for certain punishments, they would take those people and send them, and they literally had listed those places by name. It's like, we will send you to Angola, we will send you to Brazil, we will send you to Sao Tome, and that was one of the ways that they came out of Spain and Portugal, and like I said, that was just one way out. Like the ones that got caught up in the Inquisition, that was one way. The other way was people they fled, like they didn't want to get caught up by the Inquisition, even though in Spain and Portugal they were the king, the king and queen, they wanted to clamp down on people leaving. Like because they saw that all this wealth, all this knowledge was leaving Spain and Portugal. They said, "Oh, you guys, no, it's against the law. If we catch you, we're gonna keep your stuff." But there were some people that were willing to brave that because the Inquisition was just so bad, and they went up to places like London. And so that's where London comes in, because in England, England at that same time, they're starting the colonies over in the Americas. They're starting the colonies over in Barbados and Jamaica, and I know when I took a look at this, it can get very confusing because things are happening at the same time, right? Because it's like if you spend too much time looking over at Barbados, like the Jews coming to Barbados, you're going to miss the Jews coming into Brazil. You know what I mean? Like, or if I spend too much time looking at the Jews that were fleeing directly from Spain into Africa, I'm going to miss the Jews that are fleeing up into France, like into southern France. So, like I said, y'all willing? I invested some money in a map app, so that in the next video, I literally have a map where I show like a little bit, legs. I show like a hop, going from one place to the next, and then just so that you can see like, all right, so that's one direction, and now I show different places or ways out of the Spain and Portugal. Because just one last note, and that's when you can keep this in mind, is that when, and also depending on how they left and when they left, the names that they carried change. The names that they had were different. Like if they left directly from Spain and Portugal, went into like London, right? Then they were referred to as like Spanish and Portuguese brews, right? But if they left directly from Spain and came into Africa, this is when things started getting a little murky. I mean, you start to see other names for the brews that are in Africa. You start to see names like Lancados, Degradados. You even see names like Negro, right, for them in Africa. So, like I said, y'all willing? I'm going to spend some time, tracking them, showing you the primary sources. That proves like these different names that they were called in these different places, so that you can see that regardless of how they came out, they're converging on the United States. They're converging in South Carolina. They're converging in Georgia because of the laws that were in place.
No, that's what's up, man. Yeah, I've very much enjoyed that presentation, and I'm really glad I got a chance to talk to you and hear you give your information firsthand, and get more clarification as well, because what you said gave me a lot to think about, a lot to chew on, and I will definitely be building with you in the future on those things that came to mind during your presentation and whatnot, because it was a different perspective, and I thought at one point I thought you were coming at it at a whole nother way before I talked to you. Now I see what you're saying, and it's opening up a couple of doors and windows in my mind to see things differently. So I appreciate that, brother, man.
Oh, praise Most High. Yeah, I mean, like I said, Most High willing. I know it was kind of it wasn't smooth, but y'all willing. When the video comes out, it'll be a little bit more polished. You know what I'm saying? And have a few more references in there, and hopefully the story will be a little bit cleaner. Because sometimes the PowerPoint presentations aren't to me, they're not as smooth as as a video with that production quality effort behind it. So
yes, sir. So people stay tuned to his channel. Benayah Israel, it's on the screen. Go subscribe. So when the video comes out, you can be aware of its existence. Tap that bell button so you know when it's coming out. And when it comes out, I will definitely reach out to my brother again to see if he would be willing to have another conversation on said information. And like I said, where my mind got expanded.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Thank you, brother, for having me on. Like I said, same here, man. Because I saw your, like some of the videos that you did, and you brought some stuff to remembrance for me. I was like, oh man, I forgot. I didn't even think about bringing that into the presentation, especially with the whole history of West Africa, and that whole dynamic with the movement of the Arabs and the Druze and all, Hebrewisms and stuff like that. It's stuff that I knew, but I just took it for granted. And I mean, you brought that to my remembrance. I was like, yep, I got to do that. So thank you, bro, for that.
No, praise to the Most High.
Hallelujah.
And so with that, family, I'm going to put us in the back, play a cut, and say Shabbat Shalom to the people who are going into that. So y'all have a good one, family.
Shabbat
Peace.
Shalom.
Yeah.